Do we have free will? Can we make real moral choices? Or is the future predetermined, predestined? These questions have been debated down the ages. Philosophers, theologians, scientists have come up with a dazzling array of answers. Just when I think I've got it all sussed out, understood it, another possibility seems to present itself in ordinary everyday life. I think maybe some events were actually preventable. Then I question myself. Have I misinterpreted? And was it just a matter of luck or chance? One very helpful insight comes from Simone Weil in her book Gravity and Grace. She said, quote, "There's always a relationship to time to be taken into account. We must get rid of the illusion of possessing time," unquote. Yeah. This was echoed by Albert Einstein, who said time is a stubborn illusion. I think they were both onto something very similar, but from such vastly different kinds of lives and experiences as to be worlds apart. Save in one thing. Both were original thinkers, both were geniuses. Keeping that idea that we can't possess time except as an illusion, I feel just a little more confident talking about the world that I know. That is, the practical theology of Methodism. John Wesley, the 18th century clergyman who began the Methodist movement in church, is also, I'm not sure whether by good luck or sound thinking, he's also perfectly clear on the same point. He says that God knows past, present and future, but God experiences past, present and future simultaneously. That's totally different from human experience. And therefore words such as predestination don't make sense in God's experience of time. And Wesley, he had a lot to say about this. It's there in Sermon 58, called On Predestination, if anyone still reads it. But in fact, Wesley has a sharp correction against biblical literalists. They won't like it. He says translations of the Bible sometimes put terms about God like this, and it's sort of a quote. He says, foreknowing the things in heaven and on earth, or as predestining or foreordaining the things in heaven and earth, unquote. But he asks immediately, can we possibly imagine these expressions are to be taken literally? So, in general terms, Wesley's established a clear position on predestination. Let me try to summarise his thought in my words. It's simple enough, but we have to remember it's out of the 18th century. Wesley argues that the creation is in unbounded space and it's also in unbounded time. Humanity has to be free to make choices in time and space. But when we do our theology and talk about God in unbounded time and space, language has reached its limit because literal terms, according to Wesley, can't and don't apply to God. Well, Mr. Wesley put it nicely. It's got a decidedly contemporary ring to it. And so we need now to use our own contemporary knowledge of time and space. So consider this term from science, strange attractors. Strange attractors are part and parcel of today's scientific vocabulary. What are these things? What do they do? Well, I'm not a scientist. I have to say I'm not very conversant with the science of strange attractors, but I think I like what it implies. Apparently, the weather provides a classic example. Still air can be transformed quickly into strong winds. The random movement of the atmospheric gases takes on a pattern. The breeze builds, then unexpectedly turns into a destructive tornado or cyclone. Now the air has a movement that's no longer random in the way that it was when it was still air. Anything but. Yet just as quickly, the tornado blows itself out. It dissipates. That's the power of strange attractors. And there are similar strange attractors elsewhere in the universe, in nature. They have a habit of turning randomness and chaos into complexity and evolving systems. And maybe by way of analogy, there are strange attractors embedded in what we, in our limited kind of way, call the future. Simone Weil put it into the context of her own experience of God and the suffering of the innocent. Knowing that God necessarily acts with constraints that we don't have because we have free will. And I quote her, God wears himself out through the thickness of time and space in order to reach the soul and captivate it. If it allows a pure and utter consent, though brief as a lightning flash, to be torn from it, then God conquers that soul. And when it's become entirely his, he abandons it. He leaves it completely alone, and it has in its turn but gropingly to cross the infinite thickness of time and space in search of him whom it loves. It is thus that the soul, starting from the opposite end, makes the same journey towards God that God made towards it, and that is the cross. This is intensely interesting. Maybe these strange attractors, which we hesitate in scientific terms to call God, cross, Christ, do in fact in lived experience pull or shape the present into patterns. And this process might be described as emergence or becoming, to borrow a term from biology. The present isn't absolutely determined or predestined, but maybe it is shaped. We've arrived at the key point. The future shapes the purpose of the present. The word theologians use for purpose in the universe is teleology. Now, scientists generally, they throw their hands up in horror. They don't like the idea of purpose in the universe. And obviously they could say everything that I've noted so far isn't science but mere speculation or imagination. But that doesn't mean it isn't true. Or let me put that positively. It could be true. Not all true things can be manufactured as scientific facts. Scientists prefer to think of evolution in terms of natural selection, which is chance or random. But somehow the fabric of the universe is deeper than chance. There's a great phrase that comes from modern mathematics. It talks about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics. It hints at a way of comprehending the universe which is embedded in the very fabric of existence. Consider this from another angle, another awkward angle as far as science, I think, is concerned. It is the concept of synchronicity. Carl Gustav Jung introduced this term in 1950. His experiments with the Chinese divination system, the I Ching, had led him to the concept. And some scientists again throw their hands up in horror at this idea of divination. But then so do some Christian literalists. So, well, in a nutshell, the idea is this. Events in the soul or the psyche may be connected, intimately connected, but without one causing the other. And that's quite counter to the usual way of doing scientific thought in the West. Science usually sticks to a deterministic approach. One event causes another. We comprehend the effect of the second event because the first caused it. But what if you had two utterly independent events that were together yoked totally meaningfully, completely intertwined as it were, but neither the one caused the other. Jung gave an example, which is quite striking. He called it synchronicity. He was treating a woman patient who described a dream to him. She had dreamed she had been given a golden scarab, beetle. As she was describing the dream, Jung heard a tapping at the window, and he saw a beetle trying to get in. So he opened the window and caught the beetle in his hand as it came in. And it wasn't a golden scarab, but it was a close relative, the rose scarab beetle. Jung didn't believe this to be mere coincidence. To him, it was a prime example of synchronicity. Neither one event was the cause of the other, but they were deeply intertwined. They just simply belong together, and Jung believed that such meaningful coincidences occurred both within and outside of our own consciousness. They tend to get manifested inside of us in our psyche, but they can be external to it. And Jung's study of the I Ching compelled him to consider the whole rather than the parts. The whole, the two events together, give the meaning. Now this is in line with Viktor Frankl's search for meaning through external circumstances which seem so random and cruel. Frankl and Simone Weil use suffering in and through time, the thickness of time and space, to come to transformation. The crucial concept is this: synchronicity and purpose are very useful ways of understanding how our lives are lived. Much better than posing questions about do I have free will or is there predestination, God's will, because these concepts explain more. Although, of course, they aren't ultimate explanations. They just work better. And when we put our imaginations to work on the peculiar circumstances of our own unique lives, then chance, or destiny, or fate, or free will, or purpose are so completely entangled together as concepts. They're indivisible. In some spiritual guides I've been talking about, they suggest something like this: the God within is very similar to the universe without, and life is full of these strange attractors both within and without which shape our future. We don't possess time past or time future. We live in the now. Synchronicity and purpose shape the present in which we're constrained to live and move and have our being. God is not constrained like that. When we think of the silence of God and the apparent moral disarray of the world, it's no more than to realize our own failures when we can make certain choices, but we cannot possess time itself. Let Simone Weil have the last word. We must look for the secret of our kinship with God in our mortality. All our feelings are mixed up with their opposites. It's because we are a contradiction. Being creature, being God, and being infinitely other than God.